The heels came first. That is what she remembered afterward, in the way you remember the last normal thing before everything changed. The sound of her own heels on the floor of that venue, clean and confident. Each step announcing that she had arrived, that she belonged here, that this was the beginning of something she had been waiting for without knowing how to say so out loud. Ivy Jones walked into that room the way she had practiced. Head up, shoulders back. The dress pressed twice because she did not trust the hotel iron with anything this important. She had spent 3 hours finding that dress. She had spent 8 months finding this moment. Seoul was lit up outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was full of people whose names probably moved markets. Crystal glasses. Conversation that hummed at exactly the volume of money. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, across that room, standing with the settled stillness of a man who had never once needed to explain why he was at the center of things, she saw him, or she thought she did. She moved toward him the way you move toward something you have been imagining for so long it stopped feeling imaginary. She touched his arm. He turned. And she kissed his cheek the way you greet someone who already knows your voice, who asked you once what you wanted your life to look like in 5 years and remembered your answer 3 weeks later. The room stilled. He looked at her. Not with warmth. Not with recognition. With the cold, careful expression of a man who had never seen this woman in his life and was currently standing in front of every shareholder he owned. Who are you? 3 words. Someone already had their phone out. Camera flashes started going off like the night had decided to document itself. Ivy felt the room shift around her the way a floor shifts right before it gives. She smiled. She smiled the way you smile when the alternative is something you absolutely refuse to give 40 strangers the satisfaction of witnessing. She said something smooth. She excused herself. She walked to the bathroom with her head high and her face composed and her heels still making that same clean sound on the floor. She locked the door. She turned the tap on. She stood over that sink and looked at herself in the mirror, and the woman looking back at her had pressed her dress twice and bought shoes that cost more than her rent and flown to another country for a man who had just asked her who she was in front of his entire company. She breathed. She did not fall apart. Not here. Not for this. But she stood at that sink for a long time. Now before we go any further, and trust me, we are going to go much further, I need you to understand something about Ivy Jones, because this story will not make sense without it. She was not naive. She was not reckless. She was a woman who had been careful her entire life and fell precisely once for something that looked like being seen. And to understand that, we have to go back. But first, welcome back to Afro-Korean Vibes. This channel exists for one reason: to give you the kind of story that keeps you up past your bedtime, has you pausing to process what just happened, and leaves you genuinely unwell at the end of a part 1. If you are new here, subscribe before this story does something to you. It will. And you are going to want to be here for part 2. If you have been here before, you already know. Settle in. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while. Lagos, Nigeria. 3 months before Seoul. Ivy Jones was 28 years old and she was good at her job. Not promising. Not showing potential. Good. The kind of good that comes from years of doing a thing without anyone handing you the tools, without a safety net, without the luxury of learning slowly. The Adeyemi wedding had 230 guests. 3 separate catering vendors with competing opinions about what jollof rice was supposed to taste like. A bride who changed the floral theme 4 days before the event, and a live band that arrived 45 minutes late because of a miscommunication that Ivy resolved with 2 phone calls, and the specific tone of voice she reserved for situations where someone needed to understand she was not asking. The event was perfect. Not almost. Perfect. Mrs. Adeyemi, mother of the bride, pink gelly tilted at the angle of a woman who had won something, took both of Ivy's stepmother's hands at the end of the night and said, "Funmi, you have built something extraordinary. This is your finest work." Her stepmother smiled. "Thank you," Funmi said. "I always say, if you want it done properly, you do it yourself." Ivy was standing 6 feet away holding a clipboard. She had been standing 6 feet away for the entire conversation. She turned and walked to where the caterers were loading out, and she did not say a single word. She was very good at not saying a single word. She had been practicing for 17 years. Her father, Femi Jones, was a man of considerable warmth and very selective presence. He was there at dinner. He was there on Sunday mornings. He occupied the head of the table with the comfortable ease of a man who considered his physical presence to be its own form of participation. He had been this way since he remarried when Ivy was 11, and she had stopped expecting it to change the way you stop expecting a window to face a different direction. You just adjust which curtain you draw. Funmi had not been openly cruel. That was the complicated part. She was simply a woman with a daughter who had acquired a stepdaughter, and when the intangible things were being distributed, attention, credit, warmth, the specific feeling that you were the one someone would notice if you went quiet, there was a natural order. Bimp first, then Ivy if there was surplus. There was rarely surplus. Bimp was 25 and spectacularly unbothered by the gap between her ideas and their execution. She had a new business concept approximately every 6 weeks, none of which had survived past the enthusiasm phase, all of which had received their father's full attention and the word visionary delivered with complete sincerity. Ivy had built an event planning company from a borrowed laptop and a contact list she assembled herself. It operated out of the family home. Her name was not on the letterhead. She had a bedroom with a window that faced the generator. She had learned to sleep through the noise. And she had Jihan, or she thought she did. She found the website 8 months ago during research for a Korean-themed client event. It was a platform for Nigerians and Koreans to connect, language exchange, cultural conversation, whatever people were looking for. She had not been looking for anything. He messaged first, asked about event planning. She answered because she was professional. Then he asked a follow-up question that had nothing to do with event planning and everything to do with genuine curiosity, and she answered that too, and 3 conversations later she stopped telling herself it was research. Lee Jihan, Seoul. His profile photograph showed a man who was not performing anything. No careful angle. Just a face that looked like it was used to keeping things in. They talked every night. Sometimes long, sometimes just a few messages. But consistently, and with the particular texture of 2 people who were actually paying attention to each other. He remembered things. Not performatively, just naturally, the way you remember things when you're genuinely listening. One night, about 2 months in, he asked her what she wanted her life to look like in 5 years. Not her business. Her life. She stared at the question for a long time. She typed and deleted 4 different answers. Then she just told the truth. About wanting a space that was hers. About what it felt like to be good at something nobody credited her for. About the specific loneliness of living in a house full of people and still eating alone in the way that counts. She sent it at 2 a.m. and lay there with the particular exposure of someone who has said too much and cannot take it back. He replied at 3 a.m. He had read every word. He asked about the space that was hers, what it looked like, what it smelled like, whether it had a garden. He didn't fix anything. He didn't offer solutions. He just wanted more detail. She stayed up until morning answering. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Not once in 28 years. Just asked and then waited for the full answer. That was the thing that did it. When he told her about the company dinner 4 months later, she had been imagining meeting him longer than she would admit. He said he was flying back from a business trip. Shareholder event. He wanted her to come. He would arrange everything. He would be busy the day before. No need to reach out. He would send a car. She booked her flight that same night. She told Funmi she had a site visit. She packed the bag she had been mentally packing for 3 weeks. She landed in Seoul on a Thursday, spent Friday buying a dress that cost more than her rent, and pressed it twice with the hotel iron because she did not trust it, but she also could not afford to care. She did not text him. He had said he would be busy. She was not the kind of woman who needed to announce herself to feel real. She just did not know, as that car moved through Seoul on Friday evening, that the man she was going to meet had never sent it. The morning after the dinner, Ivy woke up to her own face. Everywhere. Twitter, Instagram. 3 Korean news aggregators that strangers in the comments had helpfully translated with the enthusiasm of people who were very much enjoying this. The headline varied by platform, but the story was consistent. Nigerian woman flies to Seoul to ambush CEO at private shareholder dinner. She read all of it. Every comment. Every theory. Every person who had constructed a complete biography of her character from 14 seconds of footage and felt very confident about their conclusions. She sat with it. Not falling apart, just absorbing. There was a version of Ivy underneath all the composure that wanted to put the phone face down and not come back up for several hours. She acknowledged this version. She did not give it the floor. She opened her camera. The expression she manufactured took 3 attempts. Completely unbothered. Mildly entertained. Like she was watching this happen to someone she found interesting. She posted it. They didn't even get my good side. She put the phone down, closed her suitcase, and started looking up flights. She was going home. She would figure out what actually happened from a distance, rebuild from there, and never tell anyone about the shoes. She was reaching for her passport when someone knocked. She opened the door. Lee Ji-han was standing in her hotel corridor at 9 in the morning in a suit that suggested he had not slept. Looking at her with the expression of a man who would genuinely rather be in a board meeting but was here because someone had used his name and he was going to understand why. They looked at each other. This was the first time she was seeing him properly. Not across a crowded room with camera flashes going off. Just a man in a corridor. Tall. Composed in the way that suggested composure was a decision he made daily and had been making for a long time. Dark eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing. "May I come in?" he said. Not quite a question. "You have 30 minutes, Ivy said. "I have a flight." She stepped back. He came in. He looked at her suitcase. He looked at her. He said nothing about either. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." "Why?" "Because whoever built this knew my schedule, my guest list, and enough about my life to construct something convincing enough to bring you here from another country." He paused. "That is not an amateur operation. And you were used to damage my reputation without your knowledge. We have a shared problem." Ivy sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at him. This man she had never spoken to. Standing in her hotel room, asking her to help him understand how she'd been deceived. She told him everything. The website, 8 months of conversations, the ticket, the fact that she had told no one because this was hers. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You did nothing wrong. I know that. Someone built a lie and placed you in the center of it. Flat. Not unkind, just precise. The question is why. And you think I know something useful. I think you were chosen specifically, which means whoever did this studied you. And people who study targets leave traces." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to stay." Ivy blinked. "I'm sorry. As my girlfriend. Publicly. While my team identifies who orchestrated this. The scandal is already running. You disappearing immediately reads as confirmation of guilt. You staying, attached to me by choice, changes the narrative and keeps you visible while I work." Ivy stared at him. "Let me make sure I understand you," she said. "You want me to keep being publicly humiliated. On purpose. As a corporate strategy. I want you present and compensated while I dismantle a threat that also targeted you. So yes." He held eye contact with the patience of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that silence was its own form of pressure and had been using it professionally for years. Ivy looked at her suitcase. She thought about Lagos. She thought about Funmi accepting a compliment for Ivy's work with a smile that had never once wavered. She thought about going home having flown to another country and returned with nothing but a selfie and some feelings. "I want a number," she said. He named one. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something that is technically an offer but is really just a suggestion she was going to improve upon. She named a different number. Exactly 3 times his. He agreed without flinching, which told her she should have asked for more. She filed this away for future reference. "Fine," she said. "But I need it in writing." He produced a folder from somewhere she hadn't noticed he was holding. She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "You were very confident I'd say yes. I was prepared for both outcomes. That's not what I asked." "No," he said. "It isn't." He handed her the folder. She took it. Their hands did not touch. But the distance between them in that hotel room was suddenly doing something neither of them acknowledged. She signed. They had a deal. And look, I know some of you are already in the comments. I can feel it. Stay. Please stay. Because what is coming is going to make this opening feel like the calm before something significantly more interesting. Subscribe if you haven't. The button is right there. Free. Easy. And Ivy Jones has been through enough without you finding out about part 2 from someone else's comment section. Jihan's house did not introduce itself. It simply existed at a scale that made introduction unnecessary. Ceilings that made you aware of your own height. Staff who moved through the rooms with the practiced efficiency of people who had mastered the art of being present without being visible. Everything in its exact place. Everything at precisely the right temperature. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, had worked in this house for 7 years. In 7 years she had developed an extensive understanding of what this household required and a complete absence of expectation that it would ever surprise her. Ivy Jones surprised her within 40 seconds of arrival. "Mrs. O," Ivy said, with the warmth of someone greeting a relative they had been looking forward to seeing. "I'm Ivy. I think we're going to be in this house together for a while, so I just want to say hi properly. How are you?" Mrs. O stood completely still. She looked at Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee was looking at Ivy with the expression of a scientist watching a phenomenon he did not yet have a category for. "Hello," Mrs. O said carefully. "Perfect," Ivy said, and wheeled her suitcase toward the room she'd been shown like she had just completed an important first step. She found the kitchen at lunchtime. Chef Park was mid-preparation, moving with the efficiency of someone who ran his domain on a precise system and did not require input from outside it. "Chef Park," Ivy said pleasantly. "What's for dinner?" He explained. Mr. Lee's preferences. Balanced. Low sodium. No spice. Ivy looked at him. "No spice," she repeated. "Mr. Lee does not." "I heard you." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm just processing." A pause. "Does he know? Like, has anyone sat him down and shown him what a single Cameroon pepper is capable of?" As a gesture of goodwill, Chef Park opened his mouth. "I'm not asking you to change anything," Ivy said quickly. "I just want to understand if this was an informed decision or if it was simply never presented properly." Chef Park stared at her. "I can prepare something separately." "Chef Park." She put a hand briefly on the counter. "I want you to know this is not your fault. Some things are above our pay grade. We just work here." She left. Chef Park stood in his kitchen for a moment. Then he did something he had not done in this kitchen in 7 years. He laughed. It was small. He covered it immediately. But it happened. Jihan had a study on the second floor with a view of the garden and enough quiet to think. He had been attempting to use it for the last hour. He had managed approximately 12 minutes of actual work because Ivy Jones was somewhere in his house and the house kept sending him reports. Mr. Kim appeared in the doorway. "Sir, Miss Ivy asked me whether you had a preferred method of communication." She said, and I'm quoting directly, "Because if he's going to be difficult, I'd like to know in advance so I can plan accordingly." Jihan looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "I said email was standard." She said noted, and looked like she had already decided against it. Jihan returned to his document. 40 minutes later his phone vibrated. A voice note. Unknown number. Then he remembered he had given her his contact for the arrangement. He pressed play. "Jihan." Her voice casual, like she was talking to someone she had known for years. "I found the East Garden. I just want to say that whoever designed it made at least one correct decision in this building. Also, your chef offered to make me a separate dinner, and I said no because I didn't want him to feel like he was running 2 kitchens on my account. But I want it noted that I am making a sacrifice and I would like it acknowledged at some point." He stared at his phone. He played it again. He would not examine why he played it again. 3 days into the arrangement, Ivy was in the sitting room with her laptop when Jihan appeared in the doorway at 7 in the evening. "There's a dinner tonight," he said. "Business associates. I'd like you to come." Ivy looked up. "When?" "An hour." "An hour." She looked at him. You're giving me an hour. I assumed. Jihan. She closed the laptop with the patience of someone who was going to be very clear about something. I need at least 90 minutes. Go away and come back. He came back in 90 minutes. She was already at the bottom of the stairs. He saw her and something in his expression shifted before he could arrange it away. She was wearing something deep green that had opinions about itself, and her hair was done, and she looked like someone who had decided the evening was going to happen on her terms. He looked at her for a moment. You look. He stopped. Started again. That's a good color. Ivy blinked. It was so plainly genuine, so devoid of his usual control, that it caught her completely off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she recovered. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, she said smoothly. You, however. She tilted her head slightly, examining him with the same clinical detachment she applied to everything. You don't look so bad yourself. If you did something with your hair. His jaw moved. There is nothing wrong with my hair. I didn't say wrong. I said something. There's a difference. She picked up her clutch. Ready. He looked at her for another second. My hair is fine. Completely fine. She agreed pleasantly and walked to the door. He followed. The ghost of something that was not quite a smile crossed his face while her back was turned. The dinner was at a private restaurant. 20 guests. The kind of room where everyone knew everyone and new additions were assessed within the first handshake. Ivy walked in and assessed it right back. She greeted the nearest couple with the warmth of a woman who had grown up at parties where warmth was the entire language. She noticed a lapel pin on one man's jacket, looked closely enough to read the small engraved text on the back, and asked about his daughter by name. The wife's face changed completely. The husband, who had arrived at 17 of these dinners with the armor of someone who had learned they were performances rather than conversations, sat there looking like a man who had just been treated like a person and wasn't sure what the protocol was for that. Jihan watched his usually rigid colleagues become recognizable humans in real time. He did not know what to do with this. The dinner went long. 2 of the wives exchanged numbers with Ivy at the door. A man who had not laughed at a business dinner in recent memory was still smiling when he got into his car. In the car going home, Jihan said, You were too familiar. Ivy turned to look at him. Your colleagues, she said. Looked like they hadn't been spoken to like actual people since the last administration. I was performing a public service. This is not how these things are done. I'm aware of how these things are done. She looked at him with complete serenity. I was publicly humiliated at one of your events 9 days ago. I have a very clear picture of the standards. Thank you. Silence. She had won. They both knew it. She did not let him forget it. She referenced the public humiliation twice more in the following week at moments selected specifically for maximum inconvenience. He bore this with the patience of a man who had decided to pick his battles and was not going to tell her which ones he had selected. His mother arrived on a Wednesday and the house knew before she walked through the door. Staff straightened. Jihan became a more closed version of himself, which Ivy had not thought was geometrically possible. She noticed and filed it. Madame Lee walked in with the bearing of a woman who had spent decades in rooms designed around her comfort and had stopped noticing that not every room was. She looked at Ivy. The look lasted exactly long enough to take complete inventory. Then she turned to Jihan and began speaking about Ivy in the third person while Ivy stood in the same room. How long is this expected to continue? There are optics to consider. Whether something more, a pause calibrated to land, appropriate has been considered. Ivy said, in the pleasantest voice she owned. I'm actually standing right here, which you know, because you looked at me when you walked in. Madame Lee's expression didn't change, but something behind it recalibrated. This one was not going to perform invisibility. Over the following days a pattern established itself. Madame Lee would arrive at whatever room Ivy was in and deliver something. One morning at breakfast she looked at Ivy's complexion with the consideration of a woman examining fruit at a market she found disappointing and said to no one in particular, It must be difficult. The sun here is very different from what she is used to. Ivy looked up from her food. My skin, she said pleasantly. Madame Lee said nothing, which was its own answer. Ma, Ivy said, with the gentle patience of someone explaining something to a person who was going to find the explanation uncomfortable. This skin has been surviving just fine since 1995. Seoul sunshine is not going to be what finishes it. But thank you for your concern. From across the table, a sound escaped Jihan. Small, quickly contained. But Ivy heard it. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Madame Lee with the complete serenity of someone who had just scored a point and was too dignified to collect it loudly. Another morning, Madame Lee was sitting with her tea, watching Ivy move through the room, and said, in the tone of someone sharing an observation that was for everyone's benefit, there are certain things that cannot be learned. Upbringing, bloodline, the things that simply are. Ivy set down the glass she was holding. Slowly, she looked at Madame Lee. That's interesting, she said, because the upbringing that taught me to speak to people with respect and look them in the eye when I do it, my father gave me that from a 2-bedroom flat in Lagos. She tilted her head slightly. Bloodline is just ancestry. Character is daily. And mine, she said pleasantly, is doing very well. The room was quiet. Madame Lee looked at her son. Jihan was reading something. He did not look up. Jihan, his mother said. He raised his eyes. Ivy is here as my guest, he said, without heat, without particular emphasis, like he was stating a weather fact. She stays, and she is to be treated accordingly. He went back to his reading. It was the smallest possible sentence. Ivy did not look at him. She picked up her water glass and examined the garden through the window and did not let the warmth she felt go anywhere near her face. But she felt it. Seo-jun arrived on a Friday and the house relaxed the way a house relaxes when someone brings different air into it. He was warm in the unself-conscious way of someone who had never needed to work at being liked because it had simply always happened. He came through the door, saw Ivy, and his face arranged itself into the expression of someone immediately and genuinely interested. So you're the one who kissed Jihan at the shareholder dinner, he said. In my defense, Ivy said, I thought I knew him. In your defense, Seo-jun said. The look on the faces of 40 shareholders was apparently worth it. Ivy laughed. Seo-jun looked at Jihan. Jihan was looking at Ivy with the expression of a man who was not going to confirm or deny what he had or had not told his best friend. I like her, Seo-jun said. Nobody asked, Jihan said. I'm offering it freely. That's been noted and filed, Jihan said. Under irrelevant. Seo-jun grinned and went to pour himself a drink, and Ivy watched this dynamic with the interest of someone reading a language she was rapidly learning. She liked Seo-jun. There was no friction with him, no careful awareness of the distance between them, none of the low-level charge that made being in the same room as Jihan feel like standing near something generating its own weather system. With Seo-jun, everything was surface and comfortable. What she did not register, not yet, was that Jihan was registering all of it. He had started appearing in whatever room she and Seo-jun occupied. Not announcing himself, just present. Documents to review. Calls to take. Entirely legitimate reasons to be exactly where they were. Mrs. O had noticed. Mr. Kim had noticed. Chef Park had noticed from the kitchen and had discussed it at length with Mrs. O while pretending he had not discussed it at all. The staff of Lee Jihan's household had formed a collective opinion about what was happening in their building and were communicating it exclusively through eye contact and the strategic placement of small gestures. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Ivy was doing what she always did when she needed to think. She was in the East Garden with her phone, watching a YouTube video at a volume that suggested she did not care who heard it. She heard footsteps. What are you watching? Jihan said from behind her. She tilted the phone toward him without turning around. On the screen, a Nigerian woman in a kitchen was explaining the correct way to make egusi soup with the authoritative energy of someone who had been making egusi soup since before YouTube existed and had opinions about everyone who hadn't. Jihan looked at the screen. You're watching a cooking tutorial. I'm watching education, Ivy said. There's a difference. He came around the bench and sat beside her. She shuffled slightly to give him room without making it obvious she was giving him room. On the screen, the woman said, in the specific tone of Nigerian aunties everywhere, "If you are adding your tomatoes before your onions, I want you to stop the video and go and sit down and think about your life choices." Ivy pointed at the screen. "She's right. I'm sure she is. The kitchen has been making egusi for 3 days and getting it wrong because nobody told Chef Park about the onions. I sent this video to him." Jihan looked at her. "You sent my chef a YouTube tutorial. I sent your chef a resource. There's a difference," he said. "Yes. You're learning. I'm cataloging." She looked at him. He was looking at the screen. The woman was now explaining the correct grinding technique with a passion that suggested the fate of the entire West African diaspora depended on it. "She reminds me of your housekeeper," Jihan said. Ivy turned to stare at him. "Mrs. O." She looked back at the screen and then back at him. "Jihan, Mrs. O is Korean. She has the same energy." Ivy looked at the screen again. She looked at Mrs. O, who had appeared in the garden doorway at that exact moment to deliver something, caught Ivy's eyes, looked at the phone, looked at Mr. Lee sitting on the garden bench watching a Nigerian cooking tutorial, and retreated without a word. Ivy pressed her lips together. The corner of Jihan's mouth moved. "Don't," Ivy said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to smile. I saw the beginning of it. You're imagining things. Jihan." She turned to face him fully, with the seriousness of a scientist presenting findings. "I have been in this house for 2 weeks. I have documented your almost smile 11 times. I know exactly what it looks like. Your jaw does this specific thing. My jaw does not do a thing. Right there, right now, it's doing the thing. It is not doing anything. I could draw a diagram. Please don't. I have the reference material. Ivy." She stopped. He said her name in a tone she hadn't heard before. Not sharp, just direct, like he was placing it somewhere specific. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the phone where the woman was now threatening the audience about palm oil. "The egusi was good yesterday," he said. "Tell Chef Park the video helped." She stared at him. "That's the closest you've come to saying thank you since I arrived." "It was a compliment. To the chef. Via you. That's not how compliments." She stopped. She looked at him. "You know what? I'll take it." The almost smile appeared again. This time she let it go. But not for long. 2 days later at a formal reception, a man whose name Ivy had already filed under people who think money is a personality leaned toward the colleague beside him during the dinner and said, just audibly enough, "I heard she was a cleaner in Lagos. Event staff. Someone should have checked the guest list." The table continued its various conversations. Jihan set his glass down. He turned to the man with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. "I didn't catch that," he said, pleasantly. The man looked up. Something shifted in his expression. The specific recalibration of a person who has just realized the room is not as empty of consequences as it appeared. "I was just—" "No, please." Jihan's voice was entirely level. "I'd like to hear it. Since you said it at a table I'm sitting at, about a guest I brought, I think it's reasonable that you say it clearly." The table had gone quiet. The man's colleague found something interesting in his food. "I didn't mean any. What she does in Lagos," Jihan said, quietly, with the precision of someone placing words in a specific order for a specific purpose, "is build an events business that her clients fly between cities to work with. What she is at this table is my guest. And what you are, right now, is someone who has approximately 30 seconds to decide how the rest of this evening goes for you." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. The man said nothing. He found something interesting in his food as well. Jihan picked up his glass. The conversation at the table resumed. On the way home, Ivy sat in the back of the car for several minutes without saying anything. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know." She looked at him. "Jihan." "Yes. Thank you." He turned to look at her. "Properly. You don't have to thank me for that." "I know I don't have to." She held his gaze. "I wanted to. Something moved between them in the back of that car. Small. Unannounced. Neither of them named it. They looked out their respective windows. The city went past. Meanwhile, the staff of Lee Ji-han's household had lost their collective minds. Not publicly. Professionally they were impeccable. But in the private language of people who work closely together, a great deal was being communicated. It started when Chef Park, 3 weeks into the arrangement, received a note from Mr. Lee. One line, asking whether the kitchen could prepare a specific dish. The note said, she mentioned it in passing approximately 3 weeks ago. Fried plantain with groundnut sauce the way her grandmother made it with extra groundnut. She said her grandmother crushed the groundnuts by hand. I don't know what that means technically, but I imagine you will. Chef Park read the note twice. He showed it to Mrs. O. Mrs. O read it twice. They looked at each other. He remembered, Mrs. O said. 3 weeks ago, Chef Park said. In passing. They were quiet for a moment with the weight of this information. Then Chef Park got to work. He watched 4 YouTube videos about Nigerian groundnut sauce, argued internally with the woman in the 3rd video about consistency, consulted the woman in the 4th video, and spent the better part of an afternoon trying to understand what crushed by hand meant texturally versus mechanically. The dish arrived at Ivy's place at dinner that evening. She looked at it. She looked at Ji-han. He was reading something. Ji-han. Yes. Is this? She looked at the plate. This is my grandmother's groundnut sauce. Chef Park made it. With fried plantain. You mentioned it. I mentioned it once. 3 weeks ago. In the middle of a conversation about something completely different. He turned a page. She looked at the plate. She looked at him. She looked at the plate again. She picked up her fork and tasted it. She set the fork down. She was quiet for a moment. He got the groundnuts right, she said. Her voice was slightly different from usual. He watched several videos. How many? Enough that I received a question at 11 p.m. about the difference between a mortar and a pestle, and which one was the crushing one. Ivy pressed her lips together. And what did you say? I told him one was the bowl and one was the stick. And he said that was not specific enough and sent me a follow-up question with a diagram. Ivy put her face in her hand. He did not, she said, voice muffled. The diagram was quite detailed. She was laughing now, quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere genuine. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for that exact thing and was not going to admit it. She shook her head slowly. You remembered, she said. He returned to his document. She picked up her fork and ate her grandmother's groundnut sauce in a house in Seoul at a table across from a man who had sent his chef diagrams at 11 p.m. She ate every bite. Then one evening everything shifted. It had been building slowly, the way temperatures change in a room, not noticeable in any single moment until you realize you stopped being cold a while ago and cannot identify exactly when. They had been in the sitting room for 2 hours. Not doing anything that would have looked significant from the outside. She was on her laptop, he was going through contracts. The room was quiet in the companionable way it had started getting, the way that used to feel like pressure and now felt like something she didn't have a word for. She had been telling him about a disastrous event she'd planned in 2021. A 40th birthday party where the color theme was midnight blue, and the client's husband had interpreted this as, bring a live parrot. She was trying to keep a straight face and failing. He walked in with this parrot on his shoulder, and the parrot had opinions about everything, the catering, the guests, the DJ. What kind of opinions? Ji-han said. Loud ones. The parrot said something to the bride's mother that I cannot repeat, and she threw a bread roll at it. Ji-han looked at her. At the parrot. At the parrot. She missed. Hit the DJ. The DJ lost the beat. The entire dance floor stopped. She pressed her hand over her mouth. And the parrot. She dissolved into laughter. Proper laughter, the kind that required her to put her laptop aside. The kind that took a minute to come back from. Ji-han was laughing. Not the controlled, almost laugh she had catalogued. The real version. Low, genuine, the kind that changed his whole face. The sitting room door was open. Mrs. O walked past, stopped, looked in, and walked away with the specific energy of someone who needed to go and tell someone else what they had just witnessed immediately. In the kitchen, she told Chef Park. Chef Park told Mr. Kim the next morning. Mr. Kim processed this information with the composure of a man who had known Mr. Lee for 5 years and had heard him produce approximately 3 laughs in that entire time and said, "I see," and went back to the schedule. He adjusted 3 things in the schedule that day for no stated reason. The call from her father came on a Thursday. She was in the garden when it rang. She saw Dad on the screen and picked up with the warmth she always had for him, which was real, and the specific low-grade readiness she always had for calls from home, which was also real. "Ivy, my daughter, how is Seoul? Are you eating?" "I'm eating, Dad." "Good, good. You know how you get when you don't eat properly. Your mother used to say." A pause, a small course correction, the kind she had stopped noticing he made. "Anyway, how is the arrangement? The work thing? It's going. How are you?" "Wonderful, wonderful. Bimp has a new idea. Organic skincare. I told her the market is right for it. All these young people want natural products." She listened. She asked the right questions. She made the sounds of a daughter who was engaged. Then there was a small pause and her father said, "Actually, Ivy, I was calling about something specific. You remember the Adeyemi wedding, the big one? 200 guests. I remember it. Wonderful event. Mrs. Adeyemi was telling her friend, the Coker family, you know the Cokers? Anyway, she was telling them about the event, and now Mrs. Coker wants someone to plan her daughter's wedding in April. Big thing. She called your stepmother." Ivy was quiet. "She wants to meet the planner." Her father continued, cheerfully, "Go over concepts, that kind of thing. Your stepmother said she'd handle it, but she needs your notes. Your vendor list, your timeline templates, your, your run-of-show documents. Can you send those to her?" Ivy looked at the garden. "Dad," she said, "those are my documents. I built those." Yes, yes, of course, but you know how your stepmother." "The Adeyemi wedding was my work. All of it. From the vendor sourcing to the timeline to the day of coordination. All of it. Ivy, I'm not sending Funmi my documents so she can plan a wedding using my systems and take credit for that too." Her voice was even. Very even. "If Mrs. Coker wants the person who planned the Adeyemi wedding, she can contact me directly." A pause. "You know how she is," her father said gently, like this was a reasonable explanation. "I know how she is," Ivy agreed. "I've known for 17 years. That's not new information, Dad. Let's not make this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm just not giving away my work." She paused. "Was there anything else?" A longer pause. "Are you all right, Ivy?" She closed her eyes briefly. She opened them. "I'm fine, Dad. Tell Bimp good luck with the skincare." She hung up. She sat in the garden for a long time without moving. She came to dinner that evening. She ate. She answered questions. She was present in every external way and absent in every way that counted. Jihan noticed within 20 minutes. Not because she was performing distress, she wasn't. She was performing fine with the practiced skill of someone who had been doing it her entire life. But he had been paying attention to her for weeks now, more attention than he had acknowledged to himself, and her fine sounded different from how it sounded when she meant it. His first thought was not what's wrong. It was what did I do? He went through the day, every exchange, every moment. He found nothing, which was worse because an identified mistake had a correction. He asked her after dinner, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." He looked at her. "Ivy." "I said I'm fine, Jihan." He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been studying her long enough to know exactly what her fine sounded like when she meant it. This was not that. She went to her room. He stood in the hallway. Then he went to his desk and did not open a single document. The note he slipped under her door that night was short, slightly awkward in the way of someone who was not practiced at this but was trying anyway. A restaurant she had mentioned once, weeks ago, in passing, a place that did a specific Cantonese dish she'd said she'd been wanting to try. "You said you wanted to try this. Reservation is open whenever you want it. No signature." She picked it up. Read it. Read it again. Set it on the desk and looked at it from across the room for a while. The second note came the following morning. An apology for a meeting that had run long 2 days prior, an event that had not required an apology, but he was looking for an opening and this was the best available angle. She asked Mr. Kim that afternoon, casually, whether the morning schedule had changed. Mr. Kim confirmed that several things had been adjusted. For no stated reason. The housekeeper found her in the sitting room that same afternoon with the specific energy of someone carrying significant intelligence. Mr. Lee, Mrs. O said, stood in the kitchen doorway this morning. He didn't say anything. He stood there. Then he asked Chef Park whether you had eaten. Ivy looked at her. Specifically about me. Specifically about you. Mrs. O's expression was professionally composed and personally very opinionated. Chef Park said yes. Mr. Lee stood there for another moment and then left. Ivy sat with this. Mrs. O, she said finally. Yes. Does he do this often? When people she stopped. Does he do this with people? Mrs. O looked at her with the patience of a woman who had worked in this house for 7 years and knew exactly what kind of question was actually being asked. No, she said simply. He does not. She left. Ivy sat alone for a long time. Then she went to find him. He was in his office. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since Thursday, carefully, the way you look at something you're not sure how to hold without breaking it. It wasn't you, she said. He was quiet. You've been leaving notes and adjusting your schedule and standing in kitchens asking after me. She said it without accusation. Just fact. It wasn't something you did. He waited. She came in. She sat in the chair across from his desk like someone who had decided the space was available. She looked at the window for a moment. My father called, she said. He was warm. He asked how I was. He told me about my stepsister's new business idea for 20 minutes. Then he asked me to send my work documents to my stepmother, so she could plan a wedding using my systems under her name. A pause. Someone wants to hire the person who planned the last event. They just don't know that person is me. Jihan said nothing. It wasn't even cruel, she said. That's the thing. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He doesn't see it. He has never seen it. And I stopped being surprised by that a long time ago, except sometimes I'm still surprised by it and I hate that I am. She was quiet for a moment. The specific kind of tired, she said. That comes from loving someone who doesn't register what they cost you. Jihan looked at her. I know what that is. She looked at him. Watching someone operate like you're optional, he said quietly. Like your presence is a given they don't need to account for. Something in his voice had changed. She heard it. Your son? She said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the desk. Then he looked at her. His name is Siwon, he said. He's 4 years old. His mother and it ended 3 years ago. She left. A pause. She took him. I told myself it was better. That he would have more stability without what my life looked like at the time. Ivy was very still. I told myself I was making the right choice for him, Jihan said. And maybe I was. And maybe I was also just... He stopped. A man who found it easier to let things go than to fight to keep them. The office was completely quiet. He has your eyes, Ivy said. Came out before she'd decided to say it. In the photograph in your study. The one on the left side of the shelf. He looked at her. I wasn't looking, she said. It was there. I know. A pause. He has his mother's stubbornness. High bar, Ivy said. Given the source. He looked at her. That was a comment about you, she clarified. I understood the comment. I just wanted to be clear. You're very helpful. I am, actually. It's one of my better qualities. He looked at her for a moment. And this time, he did not shut the almost smile down before it arrived. Came small and real and he let it. She looked at him. It was the first time she had seen it properly. The real version. And it did something to her chest that she was going to need a moment alone to process. Go to sleep, Ivy, he said. You're dismissing me. I'm suggesting you rest. That's a very polite dismissal. Yes, he said. It is. She stood. She picked up her phone. She walked to the door and paused in the doorway the way she sometimes did. Not quite ready to leave a room. Not quite ready to acknowledge why. Jihan. Yes. Thank you for telling me about him. He looked at her across the room. Thank you for asking about him, he said. She left. He sat in his office for a long time after. 2 weeks later, Seo-jun called Ivy at noon on a Saturday and asked if she wanted to see the Dongdaemun market. She said yes because she had been in this house for a month and the garden, lovely as it was, had its limits. She told Jihan she was going out. He looked up from his laptop. With who? Seo-jun. A pause. Brief. Controlled. Fine, he said. She waited. What? He said. Nothing, she said pleasantly. Just waiting to see if there was going to be a reason for Seo-jun to suddenly have something to attend to. He looked at her for a long moment. Have a good afternoon. She left. She and Seo-jun spent 4 hours at the market. He knew every vendor. He bargained on her behalf in rapid Korean and then reported the outcome with the pride of someone who had done something genuinely impressive. She found a fabric stall that nearly ended her financially. They ate tteokbokki from a street cart and argued about whether it needed more sauce and arrived at a consensus that it always needed more sauce. She came home at 6 with 2 shopping bags and the easy energy of someone who had spent an afternoon in the city properly. Jihan was in the sitting room. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her. He looked at the bags. He looked at her again. Good afternoon, he said. Excellent. Seo-jun knows everyone at that market. I got this fabric for 1/3 of the first price they quoted me. She held it up. He looked at the fabric. He bargained for you, he said. He bargained with me. I handled the first 2 rounds myself. She put the fabric down. You should come next time. I think the vendor experience would be good for your character development. My character does not need development. Your character, she said, is a work in progress that I personally have invested time in, and I'm not abandoning the project now. She sat on the sofa and started looking through one of the bags. Did you eat? Yes. Chef Park made the soup? He did. Was it the right consistency? It was. He stopped. He looked at her. Why are you asking about the consistency? Because I gave him a note about the consistency last week and I want to know if it worked. You gave my chef notes. Constructive feedback. There's a difference, he said. Yes. He set his laptop aside. He looked at her across the room. Ivy. Something in his tone. She looked up. I don't share, he said. She blinked. Sorry. Seo-jun. His voice was even. I don't share. She stared at him. Jihan, she said slowly. We are playing a role. That's what this is. A role. For the investigation. You said. He stood. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to hold his eyes, and she was not a small woman, but he was making the room feel different in size. Did I? He said. She opened her mouth. He kissed her. Not tentatively. Not like a question. Like someone who had been making a decision for a long time and had finally arrived at the other side of it. She kissed him back before she'd decided to. Her hands found the front of his shirt and it was not a roll. It had not been a roll for some time and they both knew it the moment it was happening. He pulled back. Not far. He stayed close enough that she could feel him breathing. Did that feel like a roll? He said quietly. She looked at him. Her hands were still on his shirt. That's... She stopped. Started again. You can't just... It stopped being a roll some time ago, he said. I'm not pushing you. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. His eyes stayed on hers. But I want you. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise while Seo-jun takes you to markets. The room was very quiet. Ivy looked at him. She looked at the small distance between them. She looked at the man who had listened to voice notes and sent his chef diagrams and defended her at dinner tables and let her see his almost smile and told her his son's name. She said, Your hair still needs something. He blinked. Then he laughed. Really laughed. Ivy. I'm just saying, you come in here with this whole speech and your hair is just… Ivy. I'm listening, she said. And she was very much listening. And her hands had not moved from his shirt. He pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he said. She closed her eyes. I'm already here, she said. What followed in the next 2 weeks was something the staff of Lee Jihan's household would describe to each other, in carefully professional terms, as a noticeable shift in the building's atmosphere. What they meant was he smiled now. Not often. Not loudly. But it happened, and it happened specifically in proximity to Ivy Jones, and the entire household had noted this and filed it and was processing it with the wonder of people who had worked for years in a building that ran on control and quiet and were now watching warmth come in through the windows like something that had been waiting at the door. Mrs. O started leaving 2 cups at breakfast without being asked. Chef Park named the groundnut sauce dish the Lagos pot in his personal recipe notes and did not show this to anyone. Mr. Kim adjusted the schedule with a frequency that suggested he was running a very specific kind of interference and was prepared to deny this. Ivy had stopped counting the almost smiles. There were too many now. They had become something else, real smiles, appearing at the specific moments she said something that caught him off guard, which was frequently, because she had made it her life's work. Late one evening they were on the balcony. The city below them. The kind of quiet that had become theirs. She was leaning on the railing, looking at Seoul, and she said, "Do you ever just feel like…" She paused. "Like you built all of this to protect yourself, and now the thing doing the protecting is also the thing keeping you from, I don't know, from being in it, from actually living in the thing you built?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "Every day," he said. She turned back to the city. He moved to stand beside her. Closer than necessary. She did not move away. His hand found hers on the railing. She looked down at it. His hand over hers. She turned her palm up. He held it. They stood there like that for a long time. Seoul doing what it always did. Neither of them saying anything that needed to be said out loud. Later that night, she heard his footsteps stop outside her door. She didn't move. He knocked once. Not loud. The kind of knock that wasn't really asking permission, it was giving her the chance to say no. She didn't say no. The door opened. The city outside kept going, indifferent the way cities do. And Seoul had seen enough of human beings making decisions they couldn't take back that it didn't bother to comment on 2 more. 3 days after that night, Yuna arrived. No announcement. No warning. Just a car in the driveway and heels on the entrance floor and the particular quality of attention that moves through a building when someone enters who carries history. She was exactly what the silence around her had suggested she would be. Composed. Constructed. Every element calibrated. She moved through the entrance with the ease of someone who considered this space familiar. And beside her, holding her hand, looking at the house with wide, curious eyes, was a small boy. Jihan came around the corner and stopped. For a moment he just looked at the boy. And then something in him, all of it, the control, the composure, the architecture he had built over years, became briefly, completely irrelevant. He crossed the room and knelt down, and the boy let go of his mother's hand and went to him without hesitation. "Appa," the boy said. Jihan held him. Ivy was standing in the hallway. She had come to see who had arrived, and now she stood there watching Jihan hold his son for the first time in however long it had been, and she understood, in the specific way that things become clear when you have no defense against them, exactly what she was looking at. Yuna looked at Ivy. "You must be Ivy," she said. Her voice was warm, carefully warm. "I must be," Ivy said. The boy noticed her. He turned from his father's arms and looked at her with the direct, thorough assessment of a 4-year-old who had not learned yet to make his evaluations subtle. "Hi," Ivy said. "Hi," he said. "Are you Appa's friend?" Ivy glanced at Jihan. He was watching her. "Something like that," she said. "What's your name?" "Ivy." "What's yours?" "Saiwan." He considered her. "That's a plant name." "It is," she agreed. "Do you like plants?" "I like the garden here." He looked at her for another moment with the gravity of a judge reaching a verdict. Okay, he said, and turned back to his father. Ivy exhaled very quietly. Yuna was watching all of this. The warmth was still on her face. Her eyes were doing something different. Over the following days, Yuna moved through the house with the ease of someone returning rather than visiting. She knew where things were. She knew how the household ran. She spoke to the staff with familiarity. She sat with Madame Lee in the mornings, and the conversations carried the warmth of two women who had always been on the same side. She made comments, small ones, the kind that were designed to sound like observations. "Saiwin needs consistency," she said at dinner one evening, to no one in particular. "Children need their roots, their people." Another evening, finding Ivy alone in the kitchen. "I think it's beautiful what you have with Jihan. Really. I just hope you understand how complicated this situation is." A pause. "Family always finds its way back to each other. It's just the nature of things. And I would hate for you to be in the middle of something you didn't fully understand." Ivy looked at her. "I understand it fine," she said. "I'm sure you do." Yuna smiled. "I'm sure it's been wonderful. I just—" She paused with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the pause. "Saiwin needs his father. Fully. Not divided. And Jihan, he would never say it, you know how he is, but he has never stopped loving his son the way he should have been able to. Being away from him cost him things you probably haven't seen yet." She looked at Ivy with the specific kindness of a knife. "You seem like someone who understands sacrifice. Someone who puts others first." Ivy was quiet for a moment. She looked at Yuna. She looked at the careful construction of the woman in front of her. The remorse, the reasonableness, the targeted kindness. The man she had left Jihan for now reportedly on the verge of losing everything. "Yuna," she said. "Yes. You should have thought about Saiwin before you left." She picked up her glass and walked out. Yuna watched her go. The evening before everything changed, it was quiet. Saiwin had been put to bed. The house had settled. Ivy was in the sitting room, not really reading the book in her hands when Jihan came in. He said her name. Just once. In the way he had started saying it recently, the way that meant something specific, something that was only between them, something that had taken weeks to grow into that register. She looked up. He was standing across the room, and the space between them was doing what it had been doing every time they were alone since that night on the balcony, existing with more weight than space usually had. He took a step. Saiwin came running through the door. He had had a dream. It was urgent. It required immediate parental attention. There was a dragon and a castle, and something had happened to the dragon, and he needed to tell his father about it right now. Jihan turned. The boy launched himself, and Jihan caught him and held him up, and Saiwin started explaining the dream with the complete certainty of someone whose emotional world had been upended and required resolution immediately. Talking with his hands, his father's eyes wide and alive. Ivy stood very still. She watched Jihan's face, the way it changed when he held his son, the way he listened to the dream with the complete attention of someone for whom this was the most important thing in any room, the way Saiwin's arms were around his neck like something irrefutable. She knew what it felt like to reach for a parent and find furniture instead. She had been reaching her entire life. She was not going to be the thing that stood between that boy and his father being whole. She was not going to be the reason that child grew up with anything less than the full, undivided version of the man who had just caught him without even looking. She slipped out of the room. She packed quietly. She had learned to pack quietly a long time ago. She did not call anyone. She wrote him a note in the way she did everything she needed to close cleanly, short, exact, no loose edges. She left it on the kitchen counter. "You were better at this than I expected. Don't let her run the same play twice." Very Ivy. Not cold. Just the voice of someone who had decided that long goodbyes didn't help anyone and was not, for once, going to ask for the thing she wanted most. Before dawn. A car she had called herself. The airport. The flight home. She did not look back at the building. She had never been good at looking back. Jihan's alarm went off at 6. He reached for his phone. He turned it off. He lay there for a moment in the particular silence of a morning that felt different from other mornings without yet knowing why. He went downstairs. The kitchen was the way it always was in the morning. Quiet. The light coming in at the angle that meant early. Chef Park not yet in. The note was on the counter. He picked it up. Read it. He read it again. He stood there in his kitchen holding a piece of paper, and the specific stillness that came over him was not his usual stillness. It was not controlled. It was the stillness of a man who has just understood something and is standing in the space between understanding it and knowing what to do about it. He went to her room. The door was open. The bed was made. The tote bag that was technically a third bag was gone. The corner of the desk where she had kept her laptop and her notes and the charger that was always slightly tangled. Empty. He stood in the doorway of the room. He looked at the space where she had been. He had let things go before. He was good at it. He had built an entire life on the premise that letting things go was the same as choosing peace, that the wall was the same as stability, that being alone in a building full of people was better than being hurt by any of them. He stood in her doorway and he knew, with the clarity of something that had been forming for weeks and had finally arrived all the way, that he did not want to let this one go. He just had no idea where she was. He went back to the kitchen. He picked up the note. He read it a third time. Don't let her run the same play twice. He sat down on the kitchen floor. Lee Ji-han, 34 years old, CEO of the most feared company in Seoul, sat down on his kitchen floor with a note in his hand and the full weight of his own construction settling on him at 6 in the morning. Mr. Kim arrived at 7 and found him there. Mr. Kim looked at Mr. Lee on the floor. Mr. Lee looked at Mr. Kim. She's gone, Ji-han said. Mr. Kim set his briefcase down. He sat on the floor beside his employer. He did not ask questions. They sat on the kitchen floor together for a moment in the particular silence of two people absorbing something that could not be immediately solved. Sir, Mr. Kim said finally. Yes. The investigation results came in this morning. Ji-han looked at him. Seo-jun arrived at 10. He came in the same way he had always come in, easy, familiar, the door opening like it always opened. He saw Ji-han standing at the desk. He saw the folder. Something in his face shifted. Small. Almost imperceptible. Almost. Ji-han looked at him. He put the folder on the desk and slid it across. Sit down, he said quietly. Seo-jun sat. He opened the folder. He looked at the account activity, the access logs, the guest list with the timestamps, the profile built from 20 years of proximity, Ji-han's schedule, his habits, his voice, the specific texture of how he spoke. All of it used to construct a version of him convincing enough to bring a woman across the world. He looked at all of it. He did not perform shock. The absence of shock was its own confession. Ji-han stood very still across the desk. He was not performing anything. Not control, not composure. He was just looking at his best friend of 20 years and running 20 years of conversations back through a filter he had never thought he would need. My father needed leverage, Seo-jun said. Quietly. No preamble. I know, Ji-han said. His voice was very low. A scandal at the shareholder dinner. Something that read as reckless. Your reputation takes a hit. The board questions your judgment. There's an opening for... I know the strategy, Ji-han said. I know your father's strategy. I've known it for years. He paused. What I want to understand is you. Seo-jun looked at the desk. You built a version of me, Ji-han said. You gave it to her. You used 20 years of knowing me to talk to a woman for 8 months and make her believe that someone cared about her. You watched her believe it. You watched her buy a ticket. You knew she was walking into that room. Yes. And you said nothing. Yes. Seo-jun. His voice broke the word apart. Not loudly. Quietly. The way you say something when the weight of it is too heavy for volume. I trusted you. Seo-jun looked up. I know, he said. And for the first time since he sat down, something in his expression shifted from contained to something rawer. I know you did. And he stopped. I thought it was clean. I thought it was just business. I thought she was just... He stopped again. Just what? Ji-han said. Just someone who wouldn't matter afterward. He said it plainly. It was the most honest thing he had said since sitting down, and it cost him. I was wrong about that. The room was quiet. She matters, Seo-jun said. Genuinely. I got to know her, Jihan. Actually know her. The way she thinks. The way she talks. The way she walked into this house and Mrs. O started leaving extra water on her nightstand without being asked. He looked at the desk. She's extraordinary. And I did an extraordinary thing to her, and I have to live with that. Jihan said nothing. I regret it, Seo-jun said. Not because I got caught. Because I got to know who she was, and I understand now what it cost her. A pause. And because... He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like embarrassment. Because if I had met her differently, if I had just met her, the normal way, without the plan, without any of it. Don't, Jihan said. I would have asked her out, Seo-jun said. He said it like a man who had arrived at a conclusion he was going to have to live with. Properly. First dinner, second dinner, whatever she wanted. I would have asked her. He looked at Jihan. And I think she might have said yes. The silence was absolute. And now, Seo-jun said, she's gone. And I'm sitting here with everything I did to get here and he exhaled. I'm going to go after her. I wanted you to know that. I'm going to find her and I'm going to apologize properly, and then I'm going to ask her if she'd let me try. Jihan looked at him across the desk with 20 years of history between them and the folder of evidence and the morning where Ivy's room had an empty corner. You built the lie she fell for, Jihan said. You made her trust a version of me you constructed. You sat in this house and watched her and said nothing. And you're sitting here telling me you want to go after her. Yes, Seo-jun said. Get out of my house. Seo-jun stood. He was not quite meeting Jihan's eyes now. Not because he was defiant, but because something about the morning had finally arrived at him. The evidence on the desk. The empty room upstairs. The woman who had pressed her dress twice for a man who didn't exist. I'm sorry, he said. For what it's worth. I'm genuinely sorry. Jihan said nothing. Seo-jun left. The door closed. Jihan stood in the room alone. His best friend. 20 years. The person who had known him before all of this. Gone, and gone specifically toward her, with the knowledge of everything she was, going to knock on her door and apologize and then ask her to dinner. He picked up the note. You were better at this than I expected. He sat down. For the first time in the length of this entire story, Lee Jihan had no next move and no defense against the fact that it was his own fault. He had let her pack quietly. He had slept while she carried her bags to a car she had called herself. He had built a wall so efficiently that the one person who had ever found the door in it had decided, on her own, that she shouldn't walk through it. He sat with that. Mr. Kim appeared in the doorway. Sir. Yes. Should I? Not yet, Jihan said. Mr. Kim nodded. He withdrew. Jihan sat in the room with the note and the folder and the particular silence of a man who was finally, completely, alone in the architecture he had built to protect himself. He looked at the note one more time. Don't let her run the same play twice. She had warned him. She had walked out the door and she had still warned him. Lagos received her without ceremony. Her old life had not paused. The stepmother's voice was where she'd left it. The generator outside the window. The client emails that had been accumulating. Everything the same. She was not. She went back to work. She was good at it, as always. The clients noticed nothing different. But she was quieter. Not the kind people noticed directly. Ivy had never been loud in the way that filled rooms. Her presence had always been the sharper kind. The comment that landed and stayed. She was still that. But underneath it something was heavier. Something she carried alone. She stopped mid-task sometimes for no reason she could name. She looked out windows longer than windows required. She ate her grandmother's groundnut sauce when she visited her aunt and sat at the table for 20 minutes after finishing because something about the taste of it made the distance between here and Seoul feel very specific. She told herself it was adjustment. She told herself that on a Tuesday afternoon when she was in a pharmacy. She told herself that standing in the flat bathroom with a paper bag. She told herself that right up until the moment she looked. The word was unambiguous. She stood in the bathroom with the test in her hands, and her hands were steady. They were always steady. She had learned that young, and she breathed. Seoul was on the other side of the world. A man who had held her hand on a balcony and caught his son without looking was on the other side of the world. And here she was, in the bathroom of the house she had grown up in, with the generator humming outside and her stepmother's voice somewhere down the hall and a question she did not know how to begin to answer. She breathed. She did not cry. She did not laugh. She just stood there, holding the test, and somewhere in her expression was every door she had closed cleanly in her life, and one she had not known she'd left open. Part 2 is coming, and I need you to be there for it. Every single one of you. Subscribe right now if you haven't. The button is free, it is easy, and it is the bare minimum after what Ivy just went through. You owe her that much. And leave a comment. Tell me what you felt. Tell me what you want for her. Tell me if you trust Jihan. Tell me if you trust Seojun. Actually don't, we know the answer to that one. I'll see you in part 2.